Yes. And I will start sharing your PowerPoint, which is now we're here.
Well, right. So luckily the quote is very long. So I mean, if I start from halfway through again, we won't miss much. So where was I? So we are doing something and no one else wants to do it, but we are going to try to do it, and we need a lot of energy to do it. So we have to sacrifice some population to drive the energy there. And we were not lucky because the sacrifice area was all this area in Cercal and Morgaville. And it was also the cheapest way to do it. So we were not lucky. We are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I think this extract is kind of a really nice one. It's in the paper that we published, we only have a little bit of this extract, but the extended version of it, I think it really links together lots of the different features of the concept of sacrifice that we'll unpack further on. But just to give some more context, we're specifically talking about solar energy here, like large-scale solar energy projects in Alentejo. And this was in 2010. This is project still operating now, but in 2010, this project was the largest in the world. So this was only 62 megawatts. So by today's standards, it's actually quite small, but in 2010, it was the largest in the world. I guess probably quite briefly, these things are changing all the time. And in 2024, this park is in the Lisbon district as well. It's called the Circa photovoltaic plant. And in 2024, I think it was very, very briefly the largest in Europe. I think it's been overtaken now by a massive one in Turkey. And then a year later, this project is now the biggest, currently the largest in Portugal. And Kaya was going to say a bit more about this one because you can explain what we're looking at here.
Yeah, here you basically see how it went, right? So you have 2020, the year where this was like a private owner. He had hectares and hectares of land. And this was actually first mediatic because of the big hunt that happened that you see on the image, on the disturbing image on the right, where there were more than 500 animals killed in one, I think by 16 hunters or something like this. And so this actually, we in the movements, we asked ourselves, but isn't it weird to do such a big hunt a little bit before the project is announced, you know, and when they go to do the environmental impact assessment? So yeah, this happened previously before, and then as the TV program Linha da Frente shows, they actually made the drone go over the site during the time period, so you can see how in 4 years you really have a complete different land cover usage here, and that green energy, right, needs a big, in terms of energy supply, is one of the energy that needs more space. And this is something that you see here. It's not only space, but it's conversion of rural or environmental protected areas to something that is industrial, right? So this is something just short here that I wanted to tell you. Can we pass to the next slide?
Yep. I think just to say as well, I've seen a more recent image of this plant, and now the dirt is turned into grass. So it has grown back. But yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that we have been seeing since the Fernando Pessoa, which is the largest in Europe, also in the same look. But we are going to explain this a bit better further on. But like just to say that we are expecting an increase, like we are seeing from 2021 in licensing of mega solar parks, right? So we have also the Sofia one that is the one that actually caused the most public attention ever in public consultation. I remember just 1 second, Ross. I remember when we started our contestation in Cercal, in the one, and this one, Fernando Pessoa, we had like, I guess, around 200 people participating, and we were already very happy to have so many people participating. And now the public opinion is at the point where you have, I think, more than 12,000 people participating in an online consultation, which is a new level of participation in mega terms, in terms of mega parks.
Just to point out as well, the scale of this one at the megawatt size is 1,200, if you can see that on the Fernando Pessoa one. So that'll be the biggest in Europe. And the one that's currently the biggest in Portugal is only 272. So you kind of get an idea, the sense, the huge increases in scales, kind of exponentially increasing all the time.
Yeah, just like we have one, this is a very, very rough calculations, but sometimes you say like it would double. Like, so you have 1,200 megawatts. So somehow the project, the area in hectares could be double. But these are calculations that, yeah, this is very specific. I don't want to start to go into, maybe when we have more time in the discussion, we can talk about
Of
this.
course, the technology changes as well, right? So maybe panels become more efficient. So it doesn't, the change, we're using megawatts there, the difference in scale, but I suppose hectares would be the thing that actually people see. So they might not be directly correlated, but we have to, something to think about. Was there anything else you wanted to say about this one?
No. And yeah, and basically the contestation, as you saw, I don't know if you heard about it, on the 13th and on the 15th of this month, there were two demonstration in Portugal, happening exactly with the people from Beira Baixa. They called for a national protest against the big solar PV structures. And it actually, again, it shows another increment in participation. I guess it is something that our movement, we also like did back in the days in 2023, but it was more localized and scenic. So I think it's really, we see an escalating of the contestation. So exactly how I mentioned is the highest one ever, like Sophia. And yeah, let's see what comes from now on.
Yeah, so this was just last week, and there's the link there is to a video with some interviews of people at this protest. It's interesting, I think this was the day after the strike. So I feel like people got real stamina to do the strike and then do this the next day as well. It shows you the
There
level
was
of
2 days in between, Ross. It was
days, okay. So yeah, just to give some more kind of policy context or kind of technical context. I mean, the main thing here is the roadmap for carbon neutrality and the National Energy and Climate Plan. These are the main energy policy documents, instruments in Portugal. And the NECP was revised in 2023, so first in 2019 and then in 2023. And you could see, and in between there was this green hydrogen strategy that was published, and you can see the kind of huge change in the expected amount of solar that was to be produced in Portugal. So at 2030, the target is to have 20 gigawatts of solar PV, with the majority of that being centralized. Centralized is the kind of ground-mounted large-scale projects. At the same time, there's been, which is what I studied in my PhD, new laws and policies for renewable energy communities, which is more decentralized kind of small scale projects on rooftops, etc. We're not talking about that much here, but the point is that is not being pursued as quickly in Portugal as has the centralized project. So there's a lot of kind of critique of the policy, how there's this kind of scalar bias where like big projects and big corporate actors are being favored. And one of the reasons for this is because Portugal has these big ambitions to have data centers and to kind of reindustrialize Seminários, and you can't really do that with small scale rooftop solar power. So yeah. So when we talk about the politics of green energy transitions, but specifically renewable energy, green energy transitions, we tend to see renewable energy as kind of the solution to climate change, etc. That's kind of I suppose, hegemonic or orthodox way of seeing things. You can see that in this image here, where you have the kind of opposition between fossil fuels and renewables. I'm not sure if you can see it from here on her hands. She says something like no false solutions. So I think that does kind of bring in a more nuanced perspective, because it's the idea that renewables can potentially be a false solution in a way if they're not done properly. And then so when people tend to protest against renewables, you have this standard way of representing those people as NIMBYs. So you can see in this, this was just a quick Google search, and this was the first image that came up with NIMBYs. You have the arguments against wind turbines don't really seem to stack up compared to nuclear, oil, and coal. It's just somebody standing in front of it saying, not in my backyard. So that's the standard kind of representation of opposition to renewable energy. And because of this was seen as a kind of problem, social science you could say, has been enlisted by governmental actors, by industry actors, to try and find ways to increase social acceptance of renewable energy. And then, but more recently, this kind of critique of like fossil fuel regimes, of etc., has been starting to accompanied by a critique of this hegemonic renewable energy regimes. So I would say like dominant ideas of energy transitions are being challenged. Terms like green growth, which is that's a term that's used by policymakers in the European Union, especially, are starting to be challenged as being part of capitalism, climate capitalism, energy colonialism. All these concepts are starting to be used to kind of problematize the way that renewable energy transitions are being done. And yeah, so the concept of energy transition itself is also kind of misleading, because it has this kind of stagist historical narrative. It assumes that we're kind of changing from one source of energy to the other, and that we did that in the past, and so on. This book here, the yellow cover, was released this year. It kind of talks about that, how there's no such thing as energy transitions, there's just energy additions. Yeah. So at the same time, we're having this kind of research in social acceptance. People have started to kind of approach this topic more critically. They started to talk about not how do we get people to accept renewable energy, but how are these renewable energy projects in the first place conducted in a way that is inherently unacceptable from a political point of view. You can see here some articles that are quite exemplary ideas of this one in the foreground is this idea of even not just do energy transitions exist, but does the idea of renewable energy actually exist? Like, how do we just conflate these different technologies into one kind of concept? So yeah, so what other kind of meanings, frames, and imaginaries are used? I guess that's kind of one of the key questions here.
You're flying your...
Yeah. So we have this concept of sacrifice on. I wasn't meant to have animations here, so I don't know why that's there. So sacrifice zone, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this idea. I think we kind of see, have you heard of it before, sacrifice zone? Yeah. So originally it was a technical term used for livestock management. So the idea when you take a piece of land and you just dedicate that to like pastures or like for animals to feed or to graze. And by doing that, you kind of maintain healthy land for other purposes. That could be food production, it could be something else. But the idea is that you dedicate kind of economic production to one in order to maintain the sustainability of the rest of the area. In the 1970s, this term became kind of politicized. I would say it seems like accidentally it was used by in the US by the National Research Council to talk about mines, and they were kind of saying, you know, we can sacrifice, if we sacrifice this area, there'll be a higher chance of other areas being rehabilitated for other purposes. And then by the 1980s, it was starting to be politicized more explicitly by indigenous communities who were linking it to uranium mining, nuclear technologies, nuclear plants. And they were speaking about it not just in terms of sacrificing of an area, but sacrificing of a whole people. But that's something I think is really important to remember, because a lot of all this genealogy is coming from the States. And at some point, this concept becomes used in Portugal and in Europe, as we'll see. But one of the questions we'll have later on is like, it's not exactly the same, or it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same. Maybe there's culturally specific ways it's being used here that are not being taken up elsewhere. So yeah, in the 1990s, it becomes expanded even more to talk about other kind of environmental justice issues. I'll read this bottom quote because I think it's quite interesting. So this is one of the central figures in environmental justice scholarship. And he says that the concept dramatizes the fact that low-income and minority populations living adjacent to heavy industry and military bases are required to make disproportionate health and economic sacrifices that more affluent people can avoid. So I think it's making this opposition between poor and rich. It's also something, again, is interesting here, which I think maybe will challenge a little bit, is this idea that people are asked or required to make sacrifices. So yeah, so now another part of this quote is that it's clearly saying that it's kind of a descriptive term in this sense. It dramatizes a story. So it's more from the perspective of the researcher, I would say. Like, it's not really the way that we're going to use it here in this kind of more pragmatist sense of how are people using it themselves. This is a concept that's used to help analyze what's going on. So yeah, as I just said, the sorry, I move Kaya again. Most research is using this concept even now when it comes to green energy transitions, etc. They're using it to help identify sacrifice zones through different processes, political, economic, and technological. Similarly, but more along the lines of where we're going with this, is that some scholars are using it to analyze how governmental actors or corporations are actually kind of legitimizing their actions. So through practices of othering and discourses of responsibility, saying that we have this area needs to be improved, so we're going to do this project here. And this sense is more where I think this idea that people are being asked to sacrifice. So they're being asked to make self-sacrifices for the common good, I guess you could say, or for climate change. But yeah, there's limited research on how this concept circulates in the public sphere and how it is experienced experienced by local communities and pragmatically used by citizens and activists. So there is some research or like theoretical kind of treatments of this, which say that as a discursive frame, which is obviously a central concept to social movement theory, it has very distinctive features. And maybe this is something we can discuss afterwards. I'm not sure if that's the same with all discursive frames or political frames. But this one in particular seems to be moral, it's effective, it's epistemic, it's political, spatial, and sometimes even theological. And we'll show some examples. And yeah, I put this in here because of Zeno's presentation. I thought this was actually in the paper where we're taking some of these ideas from. He uses the word porous, and I thought it was quite a nice way. So the idea is that the concept of sacrifice zone conceptualizes that ecological flows, material flows, or political borders are porous to those flows. Yeah, so Juskus, who's the one who defines these different aspects of the sacrifice zone concept, he ultimately comes with this definition that sacrifice zones are places where rival political ecologies of sacrifice conflict with one another over the meaning and practices of life and death. And it's not really explicit there, but I think if you kind of imagine what he means by that, it is kind of talking about it in this more pragmatic sense of how do people actually think about, how do people use sacrifice, or how do they make sacrifices in conflict with each other? So that's, I suppose, the main question we're looking at here is how is this sacrifice zone concept or framing, how is it framing opposition to large-scale projects in Portugal, and with what consequences? So I put this the paper screenshot over the top last minute, but then I forgot to reduce the size, but that's the paper that we published.
So it wasn't glitched.
Aya's going to talk us through some of the case study.
Okay, so yeah, as you can see here from the pictures, this is the land where the photovoltaic project is supposed to happen. It's also a large park. Principally, when it was announced, 395 hectares of direct impact, although the indirect impact is about 800 to 900 hectares. This is something else that is very important always to highlight here, that there is a bureaucratic separations of the project. So once it's announced, it's a photovoltaic project, but it's also always associated with a very high voltage line, a power line, which in this case is 25 kilometers. However, if you convert it more or less, these are our calculations. When I'm talking about ours, is the activist calculations. If you're talking about 25 kilometers of a new power line, we are talking about 500, more or less 500 hectares of added destruction. So this is, it was announced in 2021, and it has not still been constructed. The justification for this project, of course, besides European and national targets, is as well the diversification of energy sources, of course, ensuring supply and energy autonomy, as well as fulfilling the renewable energy commitments, like I just said. But the problem here, this is the hegemonic discourse, the political discourse of the justification is exactly this. And the people that basically proposed this project is a German equity fund. He's a capital, Aquila Capital. And some of the it's basically it's actually it's difficult for me to explain you very fast who is all involved in this because it goes from the ex-director general of the Direção de Energia e Geologia, so it's really difficult to go like pass it very quickly. But yeah, there are a lot of large hegemonic actors involved. And then on the other side, we have the protest movements and civil society. So yeah, this is basically the two kinds of actors that are involved in this. This is, as Ross already said, this is our paper where we published this study. And here you can see on the right the image of the project comparing to the locality. Cercal do Alentejo is where I live. And where I grew up. And then next to it, this is just 1 kilometer away from the village of Cercal. Just for you to have an idea of dimension, you can, Ross, pass it. Here you have, in terms of scale, so this is the costa, this is the coast, where you see here this little, this is Sines, the thing going out here. And so this is the municipality where you see both of the project is the municipality of Santiago do Cacém. The Cercal project, the one that I just explained, right, is the 400 hectare one is the one here down. And then next to it is the one that is now called Fernando Pessoa, that, as we said, has like a dimension of 1,262 hectares. It involves the cutting of 1.5 million trees, and it supposedly is will give 50 workers the opportunity to have a job. Here, this is something that Amnesty International in Portugal did. They basically this is very interesting. If you can, you can Google it. They have a lot of information about this project. They did a really nice reportage on this. But you have like here how it would look like in Lisbon on the left and in Porto on the right. So basically, you can see if you can see it in Lisbon, it really goes from down to Benfica and Campo Grande to see basically how the dimensions are also different in rural spaces and urban spaces. Just a little note, 50 workers, we are not sure if this is going to happen. This is the minimum of employment you have to generate for your project to be
We missed the last bit of the sentence, you said?
Just to say that the 50 jobs is the minimum required to have the project of national interest declared.
That's right. And is it temporary workers for this one, or is it?
No, the temporary workers are more. In the case of Cercal, there are 4 temporary like forever hired, supposedly at least for 30 years. The workforce are 4 people, and in this case they are 50. But again, the numbers for the Fernando Pessoa solar park, they do not. We think they're kind of strange. Not only the workers, but also the megawatt generated and the hectares occupied. And then remember, we also have to think that 2 factors here. Once, as soon as the project is constructed, by law, you can add 20% more. And there is a mushroom effect that as soon as there is one project, a lot of other projects will pop up in the meantime. So again, here as well, the Fernando Pessoa solar park also has a very high voltage line associated. This one almost does half of Portugal. And this power line, just a little quick update, had a cease and desist in court. It was accepted, which is not easy because all of the other cease and desist that we have done, most of them have not been accepted exactly because of the national interest of the project. So this one was accepted. However, the company decided that it's easier to continue the construction and then pay the fine than waiting for the resolution of the problem. So this power line has been built illegally and is standing right now. Next one. Here you can see some pictures. that association, they're always on the field doing the pictures, taking pictures of the what was happening in secrecy. But yeah, this is just for you to see what's happening. You can see that there are several types of trees that are affected. And yeah, next.
So which power line is this, Kaya? Is for the one going from
Fernando Pessoa.
Sorcal?
Fernando
Fernando
Pessoa.
Pessoa.
Yeah, it's the most important one because it's the one that it's the biggest and largest project, that it's also associated to the green strategy for Sines. So basically it's the one that is prioritary. Okay, so the initial aim of our study was to establish what and how residents, right, including the protest movement, what they thought about the project, and how they see the community and the future of the place. So we were asked normally to the people, what are their expectations and experiences? How do they argue against the project? This was very important for us to understand as well, even because of the discourse and the focus we have on sacrificial zones. So in 2022, this was already a year after the initial project was announced. We did a field visit. I mean, I lived there, Ross came to visit with me. And we did some interviews, about 20 residents. Then we did the document analysis and media analysis as well. And yeah, after discourse
I think it's also just a more context is that it was kind of like we say research strategy, but it kind of came together quite spontaneously because I was doing my PhD research, Kai was doing her PhD research, and we met through somebody I was interviewing, and we got talking, and also the other part of this is that, as Kaya said, the project was announced in 2021, in May 2021, and then I guess we met around the beginning of 2022. And really nobody knew much about what was going on, I think. And these questions that we had, this aim and these questions, were kind of just inspired basically by the idea that this should have been done by the people that were developing this project. We were thinking like, this is kind of basic community consultation. You go and you do interview people, you do like meetings with people, and you try to establish what they think about the project. So it starts off quite basic. It's like, yeah, what's your expectations? What do you think is going to happen? But we were just kind of generally curious about what the perception was. Obviously, Kai, you had an understanding already.
Hey,
Yeah.
just one, sorry for interrupting, but when you ask how do they argue against the project, you assume that they argue.
No, not in the interviews, but this is something that maybe this kind of question is maybe more retrospective.
Okay.
Because when we did the interviews, it was like more about their experiences, their expectations. And then we also analyzed like public consultation documents. And in there, you're seeing arguments, right? People are kind of, I mean, not necessarily, because some people just give comments. The idea is you give a comment, but some people are more in that kind of discursive mode of arguing.
Yeah, this was basically our guiding orientation, let's say like this, because you have to remember this is the Cercal and the almost contemporaries Fernando Pessoa announcement of these two solar parks was basically the first thing like this that happened in Portugal, right? So we were the first place confronted with this. I really did not know so much about the energy sector and everything. So we just started to get informed because nobody was informing us. So of course, as I was doing my PhD, not focused on energy, but on the peasants and on the farmers that actually were going to lose as well their fields to the energy transition. We were just curious about, right, how Ross already explained, what is it? How are the people reacting towards it? Because now we kind of see already, we have more studies, but in the beginning it was really, nobody really knew.
Probably in that second question, it should say for as well, against and for. And then that's something that I guess we started off from the position, or at least I did, was that this is controversial and there's opposition to this. But then as we went on, more and more I wanted to get that kind of the argument, the positive, the pro argument. And actually that came in a different way later on because we started to not just focus on discourse or like representations of the community, but actually focusing on the kind of critical discourse moments or the events that took place, and then looking in the media to see how the company was responding to criticism, like in the public sphere, or how the government were responding to criticism. So it was also in the paper, we look at that. In the rest of this presentation, we're going to focus more on on the community and the activists, just because it gets a bit too complicated otherwise. But we'll try to point to some of the situational dynamics in different parts. So, Kai, did you want to go through this quickly?
Yeah, just go to very quickly. So again, like we said, it started in March 2021 with a public session organized by the hegemonic entities, like we were saying, the mayor of the municipality plus the environmental national agency. So they organized this meeting in Cercal, explaining to everybody how they are not understanding that this is a good contribution to the world, and that kind of basically saying to us that we needed to be sacrificed for a greater good. Of course, people got furious, and few days later, we organized a group and we organized a public session in Cercal with lawyers and basically with people that understood that. Read the documents, that had technical knowledge about it, and we did several sessions. We did online sessions. We tried to inform people as much as they could. We tried to motivate participation for the public consultation, which was a mechanism that was so new for people back then that, again, 6 participations were normal in the Participa.pt. So we did as well, we did the Manual de Participação, so basically the booklet to help people participate, because of course no person has time to read sometimes more than 800 documents and to form a coherent contestation against the project in this time. So basically we help with this as well. Nowadays it's mainstream for environmental agencies and or ONGs to kind of prepare these templates of participation, but I really think it was Cercal that invented it, because there was nothing before. And so, yeah, we started with the local protest movements. We filed the court filings that we could, the cease and desist. It was rejected. We filed as well an injunction. How do you say it in legal terms? It's Ação Principal, the principal action entered as well in 2021, but it was declared, but not really 100% declared of national interest. It didn't get the stamp of approval of national interest, although the judge that rejected our injunction was basically saying that it was of national interest, even though not arguing it was of national interest. So we, in terms of power, in terms of legal spaces, it was not really successful, but we continued mobilizing the streets, we continued mobilizing activists, and we continued to mobilize even around the discourse of sacrificial area. We understood that this is not just one project or another project. No, it's a modus operandi that is actually affecting the territory as a whole. Did you pass something already? Sorry.
I just went to the next one.
Okay.
We have lots of time left, so I'm just I won't go through these in detail because it's not the main focus, but these are taken from the interviews, but also from the public consultations, just various different arguments. Kind of typical, you see these kind of arguments a lot when these kinds of conflicts, but more abstractly, I think.
No, but don't run if you want to.
No. It's like
I don't want you run.
This was more just to summarize the arguments, but and you could see how these arguments were also kind of taken up by the media. Also, the concept of sacrifice is almost taken up by the media. And then later on, this is something we focus on in the paper, but you see the developer actually starts to integrate some of these values, you could say, some of these kind of ideas about community, energy communities, environmental impacts, as they should, but a lot of these projects have not been done with any kind of consultation. So if the main problem that the community has is that they feel like they're being sacrificed, and that's come about through a lack of consultation, through a lack of participation, these kind of issues were then exacerbated the problem because they kind of come across as tokenistic or cosmetic. So thinking back to those arguments that I showed on both sides, the difference, I think, between them, I mean, there was far less people arguing in favor in the public consultations so maybe some of the reasons that Kai has said, that it was a very organized response by people against the project. But the arguments for the project were very generic and vague. They were just kind of appeals to climate change or appeals to bringing jobs or something like that. They weren't really anchored in more elaborate kind of like experiences, place meanings, etc. And one example of this is another really interesting discourse that we're not going to focus on, but I think it shows you the importance of this kind of rhetorical strategies, which is this concept of desertification, which is got a double meaning, I suppose. It's got this meaning of depopulation, and it's got this meaning of environmental degradation. So we saw this kind of idea coming up again and again in the interviews and in the public consultation and in the media. I need to see if it's a double meaning that, I mean, it obviously works in English, it works in Portuguese, but I wonder if it works in other contexts as well. But you could say that concept was used to maybe critique the impacts of the project, and the discourse of sacrifice zone was used more to critique the state and the broader hegemonic imaginary of energy transitions. So we'll try to go through this quite quickly. I won't read the extract, but there's, well, 3 key features, or I guess they're kind of bundles of features. They're slightly different. But the first one we want to point out is this discourse of sacrifice zone, when it's been used explicitly, but I mean, sometimes it's implicit in the language, as we'll see. It's articulating the injustice, and it does this in 2 ways. Firstly, it kind of highlights the spatial aspects of environmental harm. So it says that it's kind of maybe self-explanatory, but some of the harms or the burdens of these projects are being concentrated in some places, and the benefits are elsewhere. So it's a classic kind of distributive justice concept. But you can see here in that quote, it's talked about this kind of spatial aspect is represented by people in the sense that Portugal is the periphery of Europe, and Alentejo is the periphery of Portugal, and this, so it's like making these kinds of spatial metaphors in the critique, and that's linked to the idea of the common good. And I mean, I'll read this one because I think this is a very interesting extract from the petition letter, and I think it's really key from this maybe more philosophical or theoretical perspective about what sacrifice means and how it relates to the common good and how it relates to law. So they say that law dictates, and above all justice mandates, that the sacrifices that result from the common good, regardless of whether we are here in a situation of common good or not, are proportionate and distributed equitably. This is manifestly not the case. So I think here we really see that what has been saying, what the kind of community is experiencing and saying is that the sacrifice is, they're not being asked to make a sacrifice for the common good, but the sacrifice is being enforced upon them. They've been sacrificed, perhaps like the animals we saw in the picture before. Second feature, which is, because you can have that first aspect, you can have those kind of common goods or spatial justice kind of ideas without this more effective dimension, which is that the concept of sacrifice zone is articulating a vulnerability, or so you could say it's a self-vulnerabilization, I would say. I think when you look at it from the other perspective of how governmental actors or companies are using the discourse of sacrifice, it's maybe critiqued that they're seeing people as vulnerable. But here in this kind of extracts, with interviews with residents, you're seeing how they feel vulnerable, and they're expressing this vulnerability. And I mean, this is an epistemological question as well. Here in these 2 extracts, they don't use the term sacrifice, but I suppose we're interpreting it as part of the overall discourse. And the activists, the reason they use the term sacrifice zone is because they see it in the logic of these kinds of statements. And the other thing to say as well is that this kind of idea of, well, so the concept of locating and dislocating concepts of agency is in the second extract here, you're seeing somebody say that we're powerless to act. We have no agency because we don't know what's going on. So through things like Kaya mentioned, how the project was declared in the national interest, that becomes the kind of justification for everything. In the court process, the case was rejected, but there wasn't much transparency about why that happened. So this is effective, and it's also concerning agency. This is the second feature. Thirdly, and finally, this is something, again, if you look at the paper, you'll see how these different features kind of come out at different moments. And these 2 features are very clear towards the end of our research, where the concept of sacrifice, and I think this is one of the most interesting parts about it, is that kind of serves maybe like an epistemic purpose, where it helps people to kind of conceptualize the relations between different places and different projects and different actors and interests. And I think the reason that this becomes, well, this is what we definitely see this in the discourse, is this becomes more of a very, this becomes a thing because of the corruption scandal that was going on at this time. So you see how the Prime Minister resigned in 2023 due to a corruption scandal relating to projects in CIES-Iscte. So this made a lot of the residents and the activists make a link between the idea of corruption in the state and the idea of corruption with how individual projects are being conducted. So yeah, so that's the first feature of this articulating commonality, is that it unveils relations between different sites. And I think that's kind of the precondition then for once the concept of sacrifice zone starts to link together different places, it starts to unite different groups. And instead of having extracts to illustrate that, we have these images because I think they do a better job of that. So yeah, I don't know, Kai, if you want to talk us through what we're seeing here with the images finally, and then we'll wrap up. We have some more.
Yeah, exactly. So basically after... Sorry?
So maybe 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so basically after trying to go to the courts, to go to the streets, we decided to form a collective. That is, you see here, the Tirem as Mãos do Litoral Alentejano. This was our slogan in the beginning. The first manifestation we did was in 2023 in CIES-Iscte, and then we took it a year after to Lisbon in the celebrations of 50 years of democracy in Portugal, and we protested with other groups as well, like Barroso. And yeah, this to come as well to Tamla. Can you pass it to the next slide, maybe? These are some protests that we have organized in the meantime, but basically, yeah, Tamla is a very divergent group. We have from associations to movements, but as well, like, for example, cinema, we have communities, we have, for example, as well, syndicates. So yeah, we are a very different group of people that are united with an objective and a mission. This is something that is part of our manifesto that we did in 2024, asking the representatives in the Republic to immediately halt the systematic destruction of rural areas, to fully respect the will of people in all decision-making processes from beginning to end, as well held them accountable for the cumulative effects of these choices. Again, not the bureaucratic separation of projects, but as well focusing on regeneration of ecosystems to decentralized management of resources like water, energy, and land and territory. This is just some recent activity. We did last month our second meeting in the area, and this other image is an invite. This is done by Ria Brigalé in Dunas Livres, two movements as well from the collective. They are protesting all the privatization of the coasts in Grândola, and they are proposing to go for a dive on the 1st of January. So if you want, just go with them. Go dive for justice.
I just want to say, hopefully,
It's very nice.
It's coming through the relationship between the discourse and this, the actual stuff that's happening, and it doesn't seem like too much of an overinterpretation to say that what is the relationship between this discourse sacrifice zone and this. And when I was there present for this meeting on the left, and I did hear several times people there talk about this idea of being sacrificed. You were there as well, Maria, and you hear people use this language to kind of identify, like, we're all here because we're part of the same sacrifice zone. So there is a real tangible link between the two. So just to finish, these are very extensive conclusions, but I won't go through them all. But I would say in general that sacrifice zone is not just a scholarly critical term to categorize an area, but it's a frame for opposition to renewable energy projects, which is differing, I would say, from NIMBY, this kind of idea of self-interest, and even from this concept of, well, it's less well known, but it's, I could say, place attachment, but also this kind of positive parochialism, which means that it's a kind of a localist thing. I think there's something about Sacrifice Zone in Portugal which is more critical, it's more politicized, and it's got more of an outwards orientation. Maybe there's a limit to that. I guess we'll see how it develops. Can it go further than just Alentejo? Maybe Kaya can answer that. And I think one of the key things here as well is that I feel we see this in the extracts, is that there's a difference between people feeling that they're being sacrificed and then using it as the concept of sacrifice zone. There's something that happens there psychosocially or discursively where they make that jump. And maybe this relates to your question of like, are people always arguing? Well, no, the interviews we did when people were expressing this feeling of being sacrificed, they weren't arguing. They were kind of expressing pain and when they're thinking about the future. But then later on, when people were actually arguing, they would say, we're being sacrificed, or we're living in a sacrifice zone. And yeah, something we didn't go into much here, but this, as I said already, the discourse was used and developed in relation to specific events or critical discourse moments, the lack of consultation, transparency, etc. And yeah, I think it's, as I said already, it's a much more critical concept than is typically focused on in studies on renewable energy conflicts, especially when they come from this more social acceptance perspective. And it's really drawing a line of continuity between energy transitions and neoliberal capitalism. It's making these critiques are kind of inherited from a critique of capitalism. And yeah, I think I've already gone into these details about the different pragmatic functions. But yeah, I would say one thing that's maybe specific about here in Portugal compared to how it's used in the US, I think, is it's used more as a kind of moral or civic critique of the state. So it's kind of critiquing the state for not performing its own responsibility, which is to protect the common good. In the States, and this is something I want to investigate more and actually compare the two uses, it seems to be more, it's more related to indigenous communities that perhaps don't even see themselves as part of the state. So it takes on a more theological or not theological, spiritual dimension. And then, as you'll see in some of the research that we built this upon, that leads to potential to identify good sacrifices. So what could be a good sacrifice? How do we turn maybe sacred spaces into, so it's all linked to these ideas, and you can perhaps start to build alternative futures from the concept of sacrifice zone. So it's not just a reactionary or a defensive discourse. It could be something that actually helps to build something different and new for the future. But yeah, so that's one question amongst some other ones that we have, but I guess we haven't got that much time to go through them. But I was really interested in this idea. I think Kaya is too, because we're both not really studying social movements all the time, or even any of the time. So I wonder what we can learn from social movements. I know that discourse is a big thing in social movements, but so is more like maybe material aspects, structural dynamics. And so there's something, it's probably a limitation of our research that we don't focus so much on these kinds of structural determinants or material aspects, resources, and then maybe more strategically what a movement like TAMLA could learn from social movement studies in general. So that's about everything we have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Kaya, you'd like to say one more words as a conclusion, or maybe you have something to add to these conclusions?
Like just to update you as well, maybe on this question that I think besides creating synergies within the movement is creating as well political representation somehow, because different than, for example, the Beira Baixa or the people in Évora that are also fighting mega PV structures. These people, they have the municipalities on their side. We never had this. In Santiago do Cacém, the municipality was always against us. They never respected us. They actually, it was really, really bad. So from the emerged that was a political movement to municipalities to run for the political race. So basically, I run for mayor of Santiago do Cacém in this years of politics. Just as a contestation run basically, and just to say that we are always trying to find different ways to get our voices heard. And if you have some information or input to add or some strategies to help us cope with this, please, you're welcome.
Wow, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really, really enjoy your presentation.